several weeks in a row now. So next week I'll try to do something a little different. Not sure if it bothers anyone variety-wise, but I'll try. Anyway, tonight we have the case of Cindy Anderson, and it's a little strange. So Cynthia, or Cindy, was described by her father Michael as quiet, obedient, the type of girl who never made waves, but always had a lot of friends. A local neighbor described her as a pretty young lady who caught the attention of a passerby. That seemed a little creepy to me, but I imagine it was probably a compliment. Cynthia's family had many strict rules and curfews, but she followed them and even had a boyfriend who was also part of the family church. As the calendar turned to August 1981, it probably started out as any muggy late summer day would have. Cindy was running late and she skipped breakfast and ran out of the house to be sure she could get to work on time. She left her parents' Bedford Township home at about 8:30 in her white 1980 Chevy Citation. She wore a white V-neck dress. It had red piping on it, open-toed shoes, a sapphire ring, a gold watch, and she carried her brown purse. She had only 10 days left at this office before she was to start college classes. Her morning commute usually took her approximately 20 minutes, and that day was apparently no different. Now, as I said, she had approximately 10 days left. She had turned in her 2-week notice to the Toledo, Ohio law firm that employed her. She was a devout Christian fundamentalist, and she planned to attend Bible college with her current boyfriend. Cindy pulled into the shopping center where the Neller and Rabbit Legal Center was located at 8:50 a.m. She parked her Chevy close to the front door as she usually did. She unlocked the door and let herself into the office, making sure that she locked the door behind her. The lawyers who worked in that office with her were in court all morning that morning, so Cindy was there in the office by herself. It was an extremely hot and humid day, and she turned on the air conditioner so the office would be nice and cool by the time her boss and the other lawyers started to arrive. She turned the radio on and settled in at her desk. Through the large plate glass window, Cindy had a view of the parking lot and the door to the office. But she didn't really expect to see any clients until later, when the lawyers had returned from court. And this was pretty normal. Cindy usually worked alone in the mornings, as the lawyers were in court or in different meetings. So this morning was no different. Several clients stopped at the office, and Cindy handled their administrative needs, and all of them said she was in good spirits and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Cindy's mom tried to call her at the office around 10 a.m., but she was unable to reach anyone. She wasn't really overly concerned by this. She assumed that Cindy was on the other line with a client and that she would return her call later. Around noon, 2 of the law partners returned to the office following a morning court session. James Rabbit and Jay Feldenstein were happy to see that the air conditioning was on, as the temperature outside had climbed to close to 90 degrees. There were phone messages on their desks, and everything in the reception area was immaculate, as usual. But there was no sign of Cindy. It was unlike her to leave the office without putting a note on the door, letting clients know that she would be back in a minute. They assumed that she might have been in a hurry to go and grab her lunch and had simply forgotten, though it was unlike her. When the two men then discovered that Cindy's car was still sitting in the parking lot, they started to get concerned. If she'd gone anywhere for lunch, she most likely would have driven there. When they noticed that she also had not placed the phones on hold like she usually did whenever she stepped out of the office, they started to worry. They worried something might have happened to Cindy. James reached down and picked up the romance novel that Cindy had left open on her desk and sort of just glanced idly at the pages. And then he said that he felt a chill when he realized what he was looking at. May have been a coincidence, but the book was left open at the only violent passage it contained, where the lead character was abducted at knife point and feared she was about to die. Now, the discovery of a violent passage in a romance novel probably wouldn't have meant much to most. Everyone in the office was aware of the fact that Cindy had been living in fear for the past year, that someone was out to get her. It had started with a series of violent dreams that Cindy had had. In most of them, she related that she would open her front door to a man that she knew, only to have him force her from her home and murder her. These dreams terrified Cindy, but her mother assured her that they were only dreams and they didn't mean anything. These dreams really seemed to worsen over time, though, and it got to the point where Cindy was afraid to go to sleep. Cindy's fears of a stalker really kicked into high gear when someone spray painted the words, "I love you, Cindy," on a cement wall that was visible from the window where Cindy sat to work. It had been painted over at one point, but it appeared again within a week or two. The initials CJ plus CW had also been painted in several different spots. Now I know what you're thinking, well, her last name's Anderson, but her middle name was Jane. She had no idea who this GW was, but she feared that he may be stalking her. Suspicions fell on the law firm's maintenance man, who had the initials GW. However, he was cleared when the police determined a teenage boy had written that message to his girlfriend, with no connection to Cindy Anderson. Cindy, this was after she went missing, by the way, but Cindy's fear had really intensified when she started getting phone calls at work that seemed to terrify her, although she never told anyone what that person on the other line had said. The day before she vanished, a client of the law firm had witnessed this fear firsthand. Larry Mullins had come in to pay his legal bill, and he'd been chatting with Cindy as he wrote out the check. The phone rang, and Cindy answered it in her normal, cheerful voice, and then quickly slammed the phone down. A few seconds later, it rang again, and Cindy sounded a bit more tentative when she answered it, and again quickly slammed the receiver down. Larry noted she appeared to be completely petrified, and so he asked her if she was okay. She forced a smile and told him she was fine. When he tried to pressure for more information, she admitted these calls had been happening a lot recently, but refused to say anything else or give him something had scared the hell out of Cindy and asked if they could have a patrol car drive through the shopping center to make sure she was okay. Even years later, Larry told reporters he could still remember the look of fear on Cindy's face, and he said it gave him chills just to think about it. It is unclear whether or not the police went to the shopping center that day. Cindy had become so fearful of being in the office all alone that her boss had installed a special panic button at her desk. If she got in any kind of trouble, she would hit that button. It would quickly alert the employees who worked in the business next to the law firm, and they would immediately respond. Having this buzzer really gave Cindy some sort of peace of mind, but she was always careful to make sure she kept the door to the office locked so no one would be able to enter unseen. So, back to the day that Cindy went missing. James Rabbit was aware of the fear that she'd been living in, obviously, since they went as far as to install this panic button. So he calls her house to see if her family has heard from Cindy that day. Once he confirmed no one knew where she was, he called the police and he reported her missing. Now, unlike most of our missing persons cases here on GeekWaresASMR, to their credit, the Toledo Police Department treated this case seriously from the very beginning. Although Cindy was an adult and she was free to come and go as she pleased, there was nothing in her background that suggested she was the kind of person who would just voluntarily run away. They searched through the law offices but found nothing to indicate there'd been any kind of struggle. They didn't find Cindy's purse or her keys, but they were the only items that appeared to be missing. Although Cindy had been alone in the office that morning, detectives were able to find two people who saw her there. A maintenance man for the shopping center recalled seeing her enter the building around 8:50, and a woman who walked past the law offices at 9:45 had glanced inside to check the time on a clock and saw Cindy sitting at her desk around that time. By 10 a.m., clients reported no one had been answering the phone in the office. So whatever happened to Cindy happened around 10 a.m. Detectives interviewed all the people who worked in the law office, and most of them were able to confirm the fact that Cindy had grown increasingly fearful over the past several months, but none of them were able to offer any insight as to what may have happened to her or who she was afraid of. They questioned Cindy's family, her boyfriend, all of her friends, and all of them reiterated the fact that despite the fact that she was scared of someone stalking her, terrified even, she appeared to be looking forward to her future, and she was excited about starting Bible college. She was close with her family and had a large network of friends, and none of them believed she would voluntarily run away to start a new life somewhere else. Detectives were pretty inclined to agree with this, for once. The only thing Cindy had taken with her was her purse. Her brand new car, all of her clothing, all of her makeup, all of her other personal items were left behind at home. She had taken $5 out of her bank account earlier that week, but it had been untouched since then. They searched through the family's home, but found nothing to indicate that Cindy had been planning to disappear. She was known for being extremely straight-laced. She would call her parents if she was going to be even just a few minutes late getting home. Investigators believed she'd run into foul play, but they had no idea who might have wanted to hurt this girl. Investigators looked into the graffiti that kept appearing near the office. Sorry, I kind of blabbed it earlier. I must not have moved that part down. They were extremely interested in learning who GW was and if he had anything to do with Cindy's disappearance. Eventually, they were able to locate a man who admitted he was the person aware of the frightening phone calls Cindy had apparently been getting at work, but they were unable to get any solid leads as to where they were coming from or who they were coming from. No one in the office reported any calls after Cindy went missing, and they were unable to trace the ones that had been made before she went missing. A large-scale search was conducted of the area surrounding the shopping center where Cindy had last been seen. Nothing was found. Toledo police then expanded the search to include known dumping grounds throughout the city. Cindy's boyfriend and many of her other friends assisted the police as they combed through parts of the city where Cindy would never have gone on her own. They were aware that if they found her in any of the areas where they were looking, she wasn't going to be alive. In September of 1981, 1 month after Cindy disappeared, a woman called the Toledo Police Department, saying that Cindy was being held prisoner in the basement of a White House in northern Toledo. The caller spoke in low whispers and sounded afraid. She hung up before the police officer questioned her any further. A few minutes later, she called again. This time, she was more forthcoming, saying Cindy was being held in a house beside another home owned by the same family. She said the family was out of town, but their son was home, and that it was he who was holding Cindy in his basement. When the police officer asked for the caller's name, however, she hung up again. Police were never able to determine the described adjacent houses, and despite repeated pleas, never heard from the caller again. Since the anonymous woman's phone calls in September of 1981, no solid leads have surfaced in Cindy Anderson's disappearance. Anthony and Nathaniel Cook are persons of interest in Cindy's disappearance. From 1973 through 1981, these two brothers, both of whom were long-haul truck drivers, murdered at least 9 people in and around Toledo. They have both denied any involvement in Cindy's disappearance, and nothing has been found connecting them to her. Anthony Cook is serving a life sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ross County, Ohio. His request for parole was denied in 2015. He will be eligible again in 2025. Nathaniel Cook was granted parole in August of 2018. Besides having to participate in a sex offender rehabilitation program, he must wear a GPS bracelet, and he is forbidden to approach places with children. Another murderer currently imprisoned in Ohio is also a suspect, but he's not been conclusively linked to Cindy. Authorities have not publicly identified him yet. Perhaps the strongest lead to Cindy Anderson's case, though, involves the law firm where she worked. In 1995, a drug dealer named Jose Rodriguez was convicted on federal drug trafficking charges. Also convicted, Richard Neller. At the time of Cindy's disappearance, Richard Neller was Rodriguez's lawyer, and he worked with Cindy's law firm. Rodriguez's prison cellmate testified that Rodriguez had told him he'd killed Cindy with a 9mm handgun because she had overheard conversations between Rodriguez and Neller about their drug trafficking. The judge, however, said that testimony was unreliable. Both Rodriguez and Neller remain imprisoned. Neither has been charged in connection with Cindy's disappearance. was so excited about Bible college. She was attending Bible college with her boyfriend. She didn't take anything with her. No clothes, no makeup, no nothing. Only her purse and keys were missing. I mean, she didn't even take her book with her. And if I was running away, I would have taken my book. Just saying. The only thing that I can think of, okay, two things I can think of is, number one, she ran out to her car to grab something and someone nabbed her. I find that very strange because I feel like it was a busy shopping center and someone would have seen her. I feel like unless they had some kind of weapon, she could have yelled her lungs out and someone would have seen something. Secondly, then, it was someone that she knew and they got let into the office, presented her with some kind of weapon, and escorted her out to their car. I think it's increasingly strange that she was getting all of these phone calls. Like, what was this person saying to her? Who was it? It had to be the person that abducted her in my mind, because that person stopped calling once she was gone. That to me is even way more suspicious. I cannot imagine her having to answer the phone at her job and just being completely terrified every time that it rang, hoping it wasn't your stalker. I do wonder if the office experienced, like, hang up phone calls, or if she was the only one that answered the phone. I don't know if anybody mentioned that in anything that I read. They just said they never got any disturbing phone calls, but I mean, I work in a doctor's office. I answer the phone all day long, and I probably get 5 hang-ups a day, or, there's no one there. So I wonder if that was just a common occurrence and they didn't really kind of chalk it down to being related to her disappearance, where it wasn't someone, like, saying something extremely disturbing or, violent on the phone. I think it's a little eerie that she was, like, dreaming about someone knocking on her front door, forcing her outside, and then killing her. And that is quite potentially what happened. It just wasn't at her home, but at her place of work, which makes it just as horrible to me. You're supposed to feel safe, and her bosses really did everything that they could to make her feel safe. I think it was phenomenal that they installed a panic button for her so that she could feel even more safe. I do wonder, and I didn't find out. So the panic button did not notify the police. It notified the people in the business next door. But I really couldn't find out what that business was. Now, granted, I didn't do a lot of digging as far as that shopping center went, but why not just alert the police? So the police would come. I have a panic button at my office, and it alerts the police. I thought I accidentally hit it once, so I was scared to death that they would just come busting in like the SWAT team, but and nothing had happened, of course. Do we get in trouble if we accidentally hit the panic button? I don't know. So I find it really strange that they didn't find a single trace of her somewhere. Her purse and keys exist. Somewhere they have to. Either someone has them, or they were buried, or thrown in a dumpster somewhere, but I don't know. It just, these cases where people just literally just like kind of walk off in the middle of their day completely disturb me, because I'm like, how long would I be missing before someone noticed? At least the police responded appropriately, which we don't hear of in most missing persons cases, and came out right away and investigated before, like, the scene had been super tampered with, or, they weren't like, oh, you have to wait 24 hours. They were immediately looking for this girl, and I don't understand why they don't do that in every single missing persons as if someone had come in there and forced her out. And even then, would they have been able to catch this person? Maybe it wasn't a person anyone recognized. I still see that all the time, even with the power of social media. Imagine how it would have been back in 1981, where you couldn't just post it on Facebook and be like, hey, you know this creep? Like, how do they get the word out? The news, the paper, things like that. So, anyway, thank you for joining me here on my channel. If you're still listening to me ramble, I do have a Patreon that is linked in the description box down below. You can join me over there for 4 or 5 videos a month, not all true crime, for as low as $2 a month. I'm about to film a video over there as soon as I'm finished here, and I'll try to do something not a missing person for next week. Thank you guys again so much